We have talked about impact of climate change now in various ways, and we'll keep doing that because that's now a big driver. And this course is, of course, on climate change and human health. So even when we say planetary health or One Health, we are talking about managing planet's health and our health, and not thinking of them as separately, but the fact that human health is basically dependent on planetary health, which is what we are affecting, right? So this is a nice map showing mean temperature change in degrees centigrade with respect to some base period. So you can see already we talked about the warming hotspots, polar amplifications, and so on. And there are regions which don't warm, not always understood. This is called a warming hole, for example, here. But the percentages here shown in blue and kind of brownish color, I don't know what color this is, let's say magenta maybe, I don't know. Percentage change in number of malaria cases and percentage change in number of dengue deaths. Okay, so you can see that even as high a latitude as into Canada, you have a 340% increase in dengue deaths over the period of the study. Okay, this is over the last few decades, and you can see there are some regions which are in the Western Hemisphere but highly vulnerable. So there's plus 600% increase in number of dengue deaths, but malaria death has decreased, and also here malaria death have decreased, but dengue deaths have gone up. So this has to be looked at in terms of whether mosquito population was controlled or people took better care against mosquito bites, or whether deforestation and things like that reduced mosquito population. So one has to be very careful, especially when you look at regions which include forested regions like the Amazonia. So overall, you can see that we have done very well in malaria. Everywhere it's a negative, so that tells you that it's something systematic. But at the same time, dengue is also a mosquito-borne disease, so obviously that gives you some clue as to how malaria drop may have come from while dengue has gone up. So it could also be other details like which mosquito bites during the day, which mosquito bites during the night, vulnerability of the people to malaria versus dengue, immunity of people to malaria versus dengue. These are the kind of things we have to worry about. Why am I showing this map without showing all those details? Because we will come to those as we go along. But this is a nice map that shows the contrast as well as the warming, and that the changes in malaria and dengue are very different, plus they are not directly related to temperatures because there are regions that are still not hosts to these either of these diseases. Okay, so dengue is shown tremendous increase across the globe, including very high latitudes and of course tropical countries. And you can see way up here in the north it's about 140% increase. So that gives you a sense of where energies can be put in to understand vector-borne diseases, right? Of course, mortality rate attributable to unsafe water, sanitation, and hygiene, called WASH, for 2016, which is age standardized death rate attributed to unsafe water, sanitation, or lack of hygiene, measured as the number of deaths per 100,000 people of a given population, shows that Global South is completely dominating this picture. There are obviously some issues of safe drinking water even in a country like the US. Flint, Michigan, you remember, the problem is not completely solved yet. There are many other places where the old infrastructure of piping in water needs to be replaced, cleaned out, and so on. So there are problems even in the rich countries. You can see that here the numbers are not zero, but they are relatively low compared to the poorer countries like India and the African countries and this neighborhood in general, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and out here into New Guinea. Okay. Drinking water is a problem under climate change as well because of extreme rainfall events, especially over India, which actually creates favorable conditions for unsafe water, sanitation issues, hygiene issues, especially during the monsoon, which is this year stalled so far after starting on time. But the issue of water also gets worse with warming because soil moisture loss, groundwater mining, agricultural competition for irrigation water, and just vulnerabilities in terms of physical, economical, and political access to water, plus international water sharing issues and so on, all come into picture, and they all have direct and indirect health outcomes as well. Talking about direct and indirect health outcomes and disease vectors, let's look at the schematics of direct climate change effects, and next one is on indirect climate change effect. So temperature, you will end up with changes in distribution boundaries. So Lyme disease, West Nile virus coming to the US, for example, dengue coming to Canada. Higher latitudes and altitudes, of course. Burkina Faso is always used as an example where the mosquito line has moved up to higher latitude. Effects on biology and physiology, so the phenology of vegetation, for example. Acceleration of pathogen development. Temperature always favors higher metabolic rates and reproduction rates, and then rainfall can spread the pathogens, create conditions for health disease outbreaks. Completion of cycle at higher latitudes and altitudes related to that. Global wind patterns, changed migration of certain vectors. For example, meningitis bacteria themselves travel with dust in African regions, and we saw that the Kawasaki disease has a strong relation with westerly winds over Japan. Dust storms from Western Africa into the North America bring lots of bacteria and viruses, even though I'm not sure there's been a direct correlation with health outcomes. Global precipitation patterns, changes in length of season that vectors can survive, changes in relative humidity, effect on vector lifespan, effect on the genetic composition of vector populations, genetic combination of vector populations. So we now have to go from all the way to macro scale environmental variables to genetic scale outcomes of those changes, either naturally or due to human activities, right? Indirect climate change impact effects on disease vectors include desertification and drought, other changes in vegetation, hydrologic changes, changed agricultural practices and changes in irrigation practices, cropping patterns, pesticide applications, and livestock. And under these you have reduction in density of water-related vectors. When drinking water sources become scarce, more chance of guinea worm transmission, the problem in some African regions. Changes in distribution of rodent reservoirs, sandfly, thus affecting black fever. Affects tsetse fly distribution, the sleeping sickness, and risk factors. Affect tick distributions, bacterial and viral tick-borne diseases. Formation of more brackish water lagunae, extending the breeding or brackish water species. Changes in riverbeds affecting tsetse fly ecology. And here agricultural effects include a wide range of effects on mosquito-borne diseases and snail-borne diseases. So there are contradictory and counterintuitive impacts in places like Senegal, where people's contact with snails in the rivers go up during drier periods, and waterborne disease like snail disease can go up actually during drier periods. So one has to be very careful about how things cascade through the system as far as disease vectors are considered. Okay. Just to repeat the point we made before, when climate change forces human populations to migrate, it increases the threat and risk of spread of pathogens into new areas, spread of certain vector and reservoir species, spread of drug resistance, TB and malaria are always prime candidates. Matters of immunity versus non-immunity of moving or resident populations. A resident population which is immune to one disease may bring it into a region where people are not immune, or people may migrate into a region of a disease to which they are not immune. So these complicated stories emerge. Virus is spreading more quickly in overcrowded urban areas without proper sanitation. So urban crowding and other issues obviously become part of the planetary health. Okay. Overriding all this are two factors: population movements and climate change. So we have to always track those.